Okay, I am told that we are ready to start. I'm going to go ahead and mute myself, the live stream, as I'm told. I'm looking at it here just to make sure it's going.
Before we start, there's actually, I don't know if you noticed, somebody is in the waiting room waiting to be admitted. I don't know.
Yeah, it's the judge we had that moved to
Okay.
another room. So I'm just going to remove him. He's not coming back.
All right, sorry, just wanted to make sure.
Okay. Nothing like watching yourself coming back on YouTube. So, all right, I'm going to mute myself. Judge Hughes, it is yours. Courtroom, take it away.
Thank you so much, Josh. Can everyone hear me? Okay, wonderful. It's a pleasure to be here. We just received the message to get started. Let's call the case of Stevie Rogers v. Drew Mars. My name is Judge Hughes. Scoring judges, please look to the two buttons on the lower left of your screen and remember to keep your audio and video off unless the bailiff tells you otherwise. You should also have your video set to hide all non-video participants. This means the only people on the screen right now should be the advocates and me. Can the attorneys please make appearances?
Yes, Your Honor. Good morning, Your Honor, members of the jury. My name is Mason Baruki, and I, along with my co-counsel, Mr. Jacob Hayward.
Good morning, Your Honor.
We represent the plaintiff in today's case, Mr. Stevie Rogers.
Good morning, Your Honor.
Good morning, Your Honor. My name is Michelle Kumar, and I, along with my co-counsel, Serena Camilla,
good morning, Your Honor,
will be representing the defendant, Drew Mars, in this case. Good morning, Your Honor.
All right, thank you, counsel. Do we have any preliminary matters that we need to address before we move forward with opening statements?
Yes, Your Honor. First, the plaintiff would like to invoke Rule 603. This is the constructive pre-swearing in of all witnesses.
Any issue with that, defense?
No, Your Honor.
Okay, it's invoked.
The plaintiff would also like to invoke Rule 615. This is the constructive sequestration of all witnesses, barring party representatives. And in today's case, the plaintiff's party representative is Mr. Stevie Rogers.
Okay, any issues with that, defense?
No, Your Honor. For the purposes of that rule, our party representative is Drew Mars.
Okay, thank you, counsel. Anything else from the plaintiff?
Yes, one more thing, Your Honor. We'd like to direct the court's attention to the evidentiary rulings that you were handed before trial, specifically to two rulings. First is Evidentiary Ruling 17. Evidentiary Ruling 17 states that Exhibits 1 through 7 are pre-admitted and may be used at any purpose at any time during trial. And the second one is Evidentiary Ruling 22. And that says to aid the jury in understanding the evidence, Ms. Madison Bond may testify to the contents of Exhibit 6.
Okay, we'll take those one by one. Is that your understanding of the ruling concerning the admissibility of the exhibits, Ms. Kumar?
Yes.
And is that your understanding of the ruling in terms of what this witness will be permitted to testify to, Ms. Kumar?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, anything else from the plaintiff?
That's all from the plaintiff.
Anything from the defense in terms of preliminary matters before we get going?
The defense would just like the jury and Your Honor to note that we will be having a timekeeper, and if it would be all right, that timekeeper at the beginning, at the end and beginning of closings and opening statements, would the timer is just going to pop up to make sure we're not running out of time.
Any issue with that, plaintiff?
We have no issues with that.
Okay, are both sides ready to move forward with opening statement? I'm sorry, anything else, defense?
No, Your Honor. Defense is ready to move to opening statements.
Okay, plaintiff?
Yes, the plaintiff is ready.
Okay, we will now hear opening statements from each party. Everyone should make sure they are in speaker view. That button is in the upper right of your screen. Attorneys, please remember to mute your audio when the other attorney is speaking. Opening statement from the plaintiff, whenever you're ready.
Yes, Your Honor. Opposing counsel, members of the jury, may it please the court. Don't let the villain in today's story win. On August 15th, 2018, beloved mystery novelist Agatha Lee died in her sleep. Now, the death of an 82-year-old woman as she sleeps doesn't usually raise many questions, but the death of Agatha Lee was far from usual. As soon as he heard she was dead, her grandson, Stevie Rogers, knew something wasn't right. Agatha's death was part of a plot worthy of her own book. You see, just the previous day, Agatha had made plans to have her will amended in light of her recent reunion with her grandson after they drifted apart. If Agatha had lived just 2 more days, she would have made it to an appointment with her attorney and would have named Stevie her sole beneficiary. This would invalidate her current will, which left everything to Drew Mars, her caretaker. Now, all the elements of a great story are there. A reclusive millionaire, a contested inheritance, and as you'll hear today, a clear villain in the defendant, Drew Mars. Investigation into Agatha's death revealed that she had been poisoned. Her medication was swapped to chloroandramine, a drug identical in appearance to her arthritis medication, but to which she was deadly allergic. In the days following Agatha's death, the police searched her house and spoke to those closest to her, all while Drew Mars prepared to assume full ownership of Agatha's $24 million estate. What Drew Mars didn't realize, though, was that in Midlands, crime doesn't pay and villains don't win. See, under the law, no one can inherit any part of an individual's estate if they are responsible for the death of that individual. Now, this is true even without a criminal conviction for murder, so long as it can be proved in a civil proceeding. And that is why we're here today. Today's proceeding is solely to determine the answer to one very important question surrounding Agatha's will. Is Drew Mars, her beneficiary, the one who caused her death? Now, as the plaintiff in today's case, we hold a burden. Unlike in a criminal proceeding, we don't have to prove Drew Mars' guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. We simply must prove to you, by a preponderance of the evidence, that the defendant purposely or knowingly caused the death of Agatha Lee. Now, that just means that it's more likely than not that Drew Mars killed Agatha, which renders the will, leaving her as Agatha's sole heir, invalid. And today, we will meet that burden by presenting you with the physical evidence in Agatha's case and the testimony of those involved in the investigation. First, you're going to hear from Madison Bond, a distinguished private investigator who worked in tandem with the police investigation into Agatha's death. She's going to detail the findings of her investigation, including the results of Agatha's autopsy and the physical evidence found on the scene. Evidence which ties Drew Mars to the very pills used to kill Agatha. She'll discuss her observations of Drew Mars in the days following Agatha's death, and she will tell you that the police came to the same conclusion as her, that Drew Mars had killed Agatha. After Miss Bond's testimony, Stevie Rogers is going to take the stand. As Agatha's only living family, he spent the months leading up to her death with her, reunited at last and enjoying the time he had with his grandmother. He's going to tell you that she was so happy at their reunion that she was going to change her will and leave everything to Stevie instead of Drew. Now, this moment of reconciliation between Stevie and his grandmother was overshadowed by an eavesdropping Drew Mars, who made a point to tell Stevie 2 words as he left the room: "No way." That night, mere days before she was to change her will, Agatha dies in her sleep, poisoned by her pills, the very pills the defendant was tasked with arranging for her. Agatha's life was marked by her creation of an iconic mystery that's still beloved by people around the world. But her death leaves a much simpler story. One of a family reunion cut short by an act of greed. But the ending to this story hasn't been written yet. Drew Mars saw to it that Agatha's final wishes for her grandson never came to fruition. But today, that can be rectified. It's up to you, members of the jury. You cannot let the villain in today's story win. And that is why, at the conclusion of today's trial, my co-counsel, Mason Baruki, will come before you. He's going to ask you to listen to the evidence and find in favor of the plaintiff in today's case. Thank you.
Thank you so much, counsel. Opening statement from the defense.
Yes, Your Honor. May it please the court, counsel, members of the jury, it's July 4th of 2018, and the plaintiff, Mr. Rogers, stands outside the door of Miss Lee's manor. To the rest of the world, Agatha Lee is a famous author. To the plaintiff, Miss Lee is his grandmother, and he hasn't seen Miss Lee in 8 years. To you in this courtroom today, Miss Lee will be shown to be the victim of her grandson's greed. You see, before walking into the victim's manor, the plaintiff had never held a regular job. His trust fund had run dry. The victim had disinherited the plaintiff. You'll hear all of that from the plaintiff himself. Standing on the doorstep of the victim's manor, the plaintiff didn't see the victim as his grandmother. The plaintiff didn't see the victim as his grandmother even after the victim took the plaintiff in instead of turning him away. Today, we will show you that the plaintiff saw the victim as a blank checkbook and saw Miss Mars, the victim's caretaker, as an obstacle to that checkbook. But members of the jury, where there's a will, there's a way, and in this case, that will is worth more than $20 million. That way? Well, it'll be clear that the plaintiff framed Miss Mars for the fortune. Now, the plaintiff just told you that there was going to be a clear villain in today's trial, and that villain would be Miss Mars. So let's talk a little bit about Miss Mars. You see, Miss Mars was with the victim every day for the past 8 years when the plaintiff was nowhere to be found. They would eat together, play games together, celebrate each Christmas together. Miss Mars was with the victim each time the victim called, emailed, wrote the plaintiff, and that she was there each time the victim had to sit with the fact that the plaintiff didn't respond again. Ms. Mars will tell you today that while it was her job to assist the victim, she and the victim ultimately became family. The love and care Ms. Mars had for the victim didn't go unnoticed. You'll hear today that when the victim told the plaintiff that she was writing the plaintiff out of her will, she also told the plaintiff that she was writing Ms. Mars into it. Ms. Mars will also tell you that the day before she found the victim dead on the morning of August 15th, 2018, well, she heard a conversation between the plaintiff and the victim. The plaintiff had asked the victim if he could be written back into the will. Ms. Mars will tell you that the victim told the plaintiff that she would not give him a penny, not then, not after she died. But members of the jury, there was still a way for the plaintiff to become the victim's heir again. Frame Miss Mars for the fortune. The villain in this case will be shown to be Mr. Rogers. The victim's autopsy, a report that you will be able to review today, showed that Ms. Mars had ingested and Ms. Lee had ingested an over-the-counter heartburn medication that she knew she was severely allergic to. It is the contention of both the plaintiff and the defense that the victim was tricked into ingesting that heartburn medication, which ultimately caused her death. The plaintiff, however, has accused Ms. Mars of being responsible for the victim's death. And this brings us as to why you are here in court today. You see, if the plaintiff can show that it is more likely than not that Ms. Mars purposely or knowingly caused the death of the victim, Ms. Mars would be ineligible to receive any part of the victim's estate. The facts, however, will not be in the plaintiff's favor. The plaintiff will tell you that the first thing she told 911 was that the victim had been murdered before there was any kind of investigation. He'll tell you that she insisted that the victim undergo an autopsy, but that he already knew what the results of that autopsy were going to be. He will tell you that he knew the law well enough to know that here in Midlands, if someone is found responsible for the death of another, that same person becomes ineligible to receive any part of a decedent's estate. By the end of today's trial, it'll be clear that the plaintiff framed Miss Mars for the fortune. She framed Miss Mars in order to inherit the victim's fortune. You will not find Miss Mars responsible for the victim's death. Thank you.
Thank you very much, counsel. Before the plaintiff calls its first witness, I will ask everyone to switch to gallery view. That button is in the upper right of your screen. This will allow you to see the attorneys and witnesses at the same time. All right, so plaintiff ready to call their first witness.
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, the plaintiff calls Madison Bond to the stand.
Okay, Ms. Bond. You may proceed whenever you're ready, counsel.
Yes, Your Honor. Can you please introduce yourself to the court?
Hello, my name is Madison Bond, and I'm a private investigator in the state of Midlands.
And are you currently licensed as a private investigator?
Yes, not only am I licensed, but I'm also renowned for my work here in the state of Midlands.
What kind of cases do you work?
I've worked in some high-profile cases, like the TBD embezzlement case a few years back, or you might be more familiar with my work last year in saving that missing girl with brittle bones disease. Those are the sensational cases, however. My day-to-day work usually focuses on investigating adultery or family reunification cases to help people reconnect with lost family members.
And how did you come to be involved with Miss Agatha Lee?
Agatha Lee's grandson, Stevie Rogers, reached out to me in early 2018 because he wanted to reconnect with his grandmother, who he lost touch with. And after some intensive detective work on my part, I was actually able to reunite the pair in June.
And was that Agatha Lee the same Agatha Lee that is in Adder today?
Yes, unfortunately, she passed away around August 14th.
Were you involved in any investigation into her death?
Of course, Stevie actually reached out to me because of my prior work with the Lee family. So I arrived around the same time as the police, and the police gave me permission to work alongside their investigation. I relied on their detective work and their final report significantly when coming to my conclusions in today's case.
Did you have any persons of interest upon the beginning of this investigation?
Well, according to the witnesses and the police report, there were only 3 people in the house that night: Agatha Lee, Stevie Rogers, who was her grandson, and Drew Mars, her caretaker. So therefore, those were the suspects of the case.
How could you be certain that those were the only suspects?
Not only were they the only people known to be in the house, but they were also reportedly the only 3 people that knew of her fatal chloroandramine allergy.
Ms. Bond, why is that allergy relevant?
That was actually how she died. She ingested chloroandramine, causing an allergic reaction, ultimately killing Agatha Lee.
Now, when you first arrived at the house, what was the first thing you did in your investigation?
First, I spoke to her grandson, Stevie, who informed me of his concerns that Drew Mars may have murdered his grandmother.
What did you do next?
Well, I decided to follow up on his concerns by assessing the scene and looking for evidence.
And what did you find?
Initially, everything pointed to an old woman dying of natural causes. The body was undisturbed, she looked uninjured, and the only thing of interest was an inconspicuous pill organizer set open on the nightstand.
Would you recognize a photograph of that pill organizer if I were to show you one today?
Yes, I believe so.
Your Honor, permission for my co-counsel to display an image of what has been marked as Exhibit 12.
Any objection, defense?
Sorry, Your Honor, no objections.
Okay, plaintiff, you may display the exhibit.
One moment, Your Honor. Sorry. Ms. Bond, what is this an image depicting?
This is an image of that pill organizer.
And is it a fair and accurate depiction?
I believe so, yes.
Has it been changed or altered in any way?
No, not to my knowledge.
At this time, the plaintiff moves Exhibit 12 into evidence.
Any objection from the defense?
No objections, Your Honor.
Okay, exhibit 12 is admitted.
Ms. Bond, what exactly are we looking at here?
So this was Agatha's pill organizer. Drew Mars would apparently place the pills in each day for whatever Agatha needed to take in that given week. You could see she took 2 of the same pill each day and then 2 other pills that were different types of medications.
Now, Ms. Bond, did you observe anything else of note during your initial survey of the scene?
The only other thing I found of note was Drew Mars, the caretaker, seemed rather agitated and anxious. She was very adamant that Agatha get cremated as soon as possible. However, in order to comfort Agatha's distressed grandson, I recommended an autopsy be performed first. And that's how we discovered there was more to this case than meets the eye.
What do you mean by that?
Well, there were actually 3 things that helped me uncover the mysteries of this case. The first was the announcement of Agatha's will. The second was the toxicology report from Agatha's autopsy. And the third was the hidden black bag discovered by the police.
Well, let's take those one at a time and start with the will. What did you find during the announcement of Agatha's will?
The will announced that Drew Mars, Agatha's caretaker, was the sole inheritor of the will.
And how did Drew Mars react to that at the will reading?
They acted very surprised, like they had no idea. And that would have eliminated them as a suspect. However, their surprise was a lie, ultimately.
Objection, Your Honor, speculation.
Response from the plaintiff?
Your Honor, if I may proffer, this witness will testify as to extrinsic evidence confirming this to be a lie. If I may proffer, that's actually where we are going in the course of reviewing her investigation.
Okay, defense? Response?
Your Honor, counsel has no way of proving that Miss Mars at that time was speaking about the evidence I believe opposing counsel is going to bring forth. They have no way, if I may proffer, I believe opposing counsel is going to bring an email, and in this statement, there's nothing about Miss Mars that would indicate that she was talking about not knowing about the will. There's nothing to indicate that.
Defense, do me a favor and just clarify for me, what exactly do you contend was speculative? What statement that was made?
Miss Bond saying that Miss Mars was lying in that moment.
Okay, one last response from the plaintiff.
Yes, Your Honor. Ms. Bond has testified that she made extensive use of the police report in her investigation, which has been pre-admitted into evidence. Ms. Bond, drawing both on the investigation by the police into Drew Mars through that report, as well as her own experience, which, as I way proffer, she will testify to, it provide her with concrete evidence of Drew Mars' untruthfulness in this moment.
Okay, because we haven't seen that evidence that you just mentioned, I'm going to sustain the objection. You're going to strike the speculative statement concerning her lying. You can go ahead and present the evidence and we can draw our conclusions based on the evidence that you present. But for now, given the foundation that we have, the objection is sustained and the statement is stricken.
Yes, Your Honor. Now, Ms. Bond, did you uncover any evidence in your investigation that Drew Mars had knowledge of Agatha's will?
I actually did. I discovered an email on Drew Mars's computer regarding Drew's knowledge of that will.
Would you recognize a photo of that email if I were to show you one today?
Yes, I would.
Permission to display what has been previously marked as Exhibit 13.
Any objections, defense?
No objection to displaying it.
Pardon me, you may display the exhibit.
Yes, Your Honor. Now, Ms. Bond, what is this a depiction of?
This is a copy of that email discovered on Drew Mars's computer.
Is it a fair and accurate depiction?
Yes, I believe so.
Has it been changed or altered in any way?
Not to my knowledge, no.
At this time, the plaintiff moves Exhibit 13 into evidence.
Any objection from the defense?
No objection, Your Honor.
Exhibit 13 is admitted.
Now, Ms. Bond, what exactly did this email tell you?
Well, in the email, you can see Drew Mars writes, Agatha just told me she changed her will to leave everything to me. The will is dated today saying, Stevie, the no good grandkid, is out and I get everything. The house, the money, everything. And so I found that to be evidence that Drew Mars was lying when they appeared surprised at the will reading. It also establishes—
Objection, Your Honor. Again, to speculation.
Response from the plaintiff?
Yes, Your Honor. This is the accumulation of Ms. Bond's investigation. She has testified to the extrinsic evidence she had on which she based her perception rationally that Drew Mars was lying when acting surprised. The witness can testify to her rationally based perception pursuant to Rule 701.
Defense?
Your Honor, it would be improper for Ms. Bond to say that this was a lie because opposing counsel has no way of proving that this is what Ms. Mars was shocked about. It could be anything. Miss Lee had just died. She could be shocked about literally anything, and opposing counsel has no way of proving that this email shows that she was shocked about getting the will, making her lie.
Okay, last response, plaintiff.
Yes, Your Honor. It is already in the record that these statements were listed at the will reading, and Ms. Bond has testified that Drew Mars' response to the will reading was, I can't believe it. I had no idea. This provides conclusive evidence for her to form a rationally based perception that Drew Mars might have been lying. Opposing counsel is welcome to cross Ms. Bond on that conclusion during their cross-examination.
Okay, well, we're going to let those two pieces of evidence speak for themselves and we'll draw our own conclusions based on them. And of course, you will highlight those two pieces of evidence and aid us in doing that. But the objection is sustained and the statement concerning lying, that characterization, editorialization is stricken.
Yes, Your Honor. Now, Ms. Bond, you mentioned some other factors that were relevant in your investigation besides the will. Can you remind us what those were?
Sure. Well, the next one was the toxicology report.
And what did you learn from the toxicology report?
Well, it came back from the coroner's office, and Agatha's death was in fact not from natural causes. Agatha had a large amount of the drug chloroandramine in her system, provoking a lethal allergic reaction.
Can you tell us a bit about chloroandramine?
Of course, it's an over-the-counter drug for heartburn, but it looks exactly like Agatha's arthritis medication.
Was any chloroandramine found at Lee Manor?
Yes, there was a bottle of it found in Drew Mars's closet, which brings me to the last significant clue in my investigation, the black bag containing chloroandramine discovered by the police.
Ms. Bond, what exactly were the contents of this black bag you mentioned?
The bag contained some cigarettes and the bottle of chloroandramine.
Was any physical evidence recovered from that bag?
On the bottle of chloroandromine, there were finger smudges, but no usable prints. There was, however, a usable print on the zipper of the bag itself, and that fingerprint belonged to Drew Mars.
Would you recognize a photo of that bottle of chloroandromine if I were to show you one today?
Yes, I would.
Your Honor, permission to display what has previously been marked as Exhibit 17.
Any objections from the defense?
No objections, Your Honor.
Okay, plaintiff, you can go ahead and display that exhibit.
Your Honor. Ms. Bond, what does this image depict?
This is that bottle of chloroandromine discovered in Drew Mars's closet.
Is this a fair and accurate depiction?
Yes, I believe so.
Has it been changed or altered in any way?
Not to my knowledge.
Your Honor, at this time, the plaintiff moves Exhibit 17 into evidence.
Any objection from the defense?
No objection, Your Honor.
Exhibit 17 is admitted.
Now, Ms. Bond, what was significant about this pill bottle?
Well, the chloroandromine pills in that bottle look the exact same as the 2 arthritis pills that Agatha took every night. Per the results of her autopsy, that is what caused her death that night.
Ms. Bond, was there any other evidence relating to chloroandromine or that autopsy report you mentioned?
Well, in the autopsy report, not only did Agatha have chloroandromine in her system, but we also discovered she only had trace amounts of her arthritis medication in her system from that night, showing that she didn't ingest her arthritis medication, but she did ingest chloroandromine.
Did you find any evidence that could have explained that?
Well, there were also fingerprints found belonging to Drew Mars on 2 of the arthritis pills in Agatha's pill bottle.
And why did that stand out to you?
You'd expect to find prints on the pills in the organizer, but not the ones in the bottle. It suggests that pills may have been taken from the organizer and placed back into the bottle, possibly, which could explain why she had very little of the arthritis medication in her system, but she did have the chloroandromine in her system.
And Ms. Bond, did you receive a copy of the police's final report?
Yes, I did. I received a copy of the detective's final report.
And what was the conclusion that the police came to?
Well, the detective came to all the same conclusions that I did, and she arrested Drew Mars for the murder of Agatha Lee.
Thank you. No further questions.
All right, thank you, counsel. Cross-examination from the defense. You may proceed
Yes.
when you're ready.
Yes, Your Honor. Good morning, Miss Bond. As a private investigator, you get paid for your work, right?
I do, yes. Because of my good track record here in Midlands, I actually have a substantial fee for my work.
So let's talk about the work you did relating to the victim, Agatha Lee. The first time you worked on this case, it was to find the victim's address, right?
It was.
And to find that address, it took you about 2 days, didn't it?
It did.
So let's talk about the second time you worked on this case. On the 15th of August, you walked around the victim's house, didn't you?
Yes, I did. I followed the investigators as they conducted their investigation.
And that took you about 1 day, didn't it?
It did the initial survey of the scene.
And on the 21st, you observed Detective Khan as she investigated the house, right?
Yes, ma'am.
That also took you 1 day, true?
Yes,
You later attended the will reading, correct?
I did, yes.
And that reading only took about 30 minutes, right?
To my knowledge, that sounds correct.
And a few days after the will reading, you gave a speech, correct?
I did, yes.
To read that speech, it also took about 30 minutes.
I believe so, approximately.
And both times you were hired, it was by the plaintiff, wasn't it?
Yes, I believe Stevie was the one who hired me to begin looking into this case.
In total, you helped the plaintiff for 4 days and 1 hour, and you got paid $35,000 for that, didn't you?
Well,
Objection, Your Honor. Compound question.
Sustained. Ms. Kumar, just break those up.
Miss Bond, in total, you helped the plaintiff for 4 days and 1 hour, right?
That's not necessarily true, counsel. I actually do a lot of my work examining evidence in my own office on my own time. And so all of that time would also get added into my investigation in today's case.
So for approximately 2 weeks and 1 hour, you helped the plaintiff, didn't you?
Yes, approximately.
So for that work, you got paid $35,000, right?
Yes, that's my standard fee for cases like this.
So let's talk about some of your observations. To the best of your knowledge, the plaintiff was living at Lee Manor at the time of the victim's death, wasn't he?
Yes, to my knowledge, that's correct.
And to the best of your knowledge, Miss Mars was also living there at the time of the death?
Yes, you're correct.
Miss Bond, you knew the victim was allergic to chloroandramine, right?
I was aware from my investigation. Drew Mars actually passed along that information to me early in my investigation.
So Miss Bond, that's a yes to my question. You knew the victim was allergic to chloroandramine?
Yes, ma'am.
And you also knew that allergy to be fatal, didn't you?
Yes, according to Drew Mars.
Miss Bond, you are aware that the plaintiff knew about this fatal allergy, right?
Yes, I was aware.
In fact, you were aware that the plaintiff knew about this life-threatening allergy prior to the victim's death.
Yes.
You were aware that the victim died from chloroandramine, right?
Yes, per the results of the autopsy.
I'd like to go back to something you said earlier on direct. You mentioned that the plaintiff called you the day the victim was found, right?
Yes, that's correct. I received a call that morning.
And when the plaintiff called you, he said it was murder, didn't he?
Yes, he sounded rather concerned on the phone.
The plaintiff said it was murder before an investigation had been done, didn't he?
Yes, he seemed adamant about it. I hadn't seen any evidence yet, and so I wasn't sure what to draw from my conclusions. But when I arrived at the scene, and after a few days of investigative work from the detectives, we arrived at the same conclusion that it was in fact a murder.
Well, Miss Bond, the plaintiff was adamant it was murder before an autopsy had been done, right?
You're correct.
And the plaintiff was insistent that a toxicology screen be done, even though, like you said, all initial evidence pointed to natural causes, right?
Yes.
Now, you mentioned that you accompanied Detective Khan on August 21st. That day you found a black bag, didn't you?
Yes.
And inside that black bag was a box of cigarettes, wasn't it?
Yes, it was found in Drew Mars's closet. It was a black bag of cigarettes and the bottle of chloroanthemine.
Your Honor, permission for Ms. Conforth to put up Exhibit 16?
Any objection from the plaintiff?
No objection, Your Honor.
All right, you may display that defense.
Ms. Bond, you recognize Exhibit 16 as the cigarettes that was found in the bag, don't you?
Yes, ma'am, I do.
Your Honor, defense offers Exhibit 16.
Any objection, plaintiff?
No objection, Your Honor.
Exhibit 16 is admitted.
Ms. Conforth, you can remove Exhibit 16. Ms. Bond, I'd like to talk about that black bag. That black bag returned a partial print, didn't it?
Yes, there was a partial print on the zipper of the bag itself, and that print belonged to Drew Mars.
And to the best of your knowledge, fingerprints don't have timestamps on them, do they?
No, you're correct, counsel. There are no timestamps on fingerprints.
So to the best of your knowledge, you can't tell exactly when a fingerprint had been placed, can you?
You're correct. We can tell.
So to the best of your knowledge, Ms. Bond, that fingerprint could have been placed after the victim's death, right?
That is a possibility.
To the best of your knowledge, Ms. Bond, that partial fingerprint could have been placed there at any point in time.
You're right. We can't determine what time the fingerprint was placed. It was, however, suspicious that it was on the zipper of the bag itself, implying that it got opened in some capacity.
So that's a yes to my question. That partial fingerprint could have been placed there at any point in time.
Yes, you're correct.
You You also mentioned that Miss Mars' prints were on the 2 Winterin pills, didn't you?
Yes,
Well, Miss Bond, those fingerprints can't tell us what time they were put there either, can they?
you're correct. We again don't know when those fingerprints were on those pills, were placed.
Those fingerprints could have been placed on the Winterin pills long before Miss Lee was found dead, couldn't they?
You're correct. That's a possibility. However, it is rather suspicious that it was found on 2 of the pills, as 2 of the pills were what were in the pill organizer from that night.
Well, Miss Bond, you're aware of the fact that it's Miss Mars's job to prepare Miss Lee's pills?
Yes, you're correct.
She needed to be around those pills long enough to refill the pills for the week, didn't they?
Yes.
No further questions, Your Honor.
All right, thank you, counsel. Any redirect from the plaintiff?
No redirect, Your Honor. I just asked that the witness be allowed to step down.
Okay, you may step down. Thank you for your time, Ms. Bond. Does the plaintiff have a second witness they'd like to call?
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, the plaintiff calls Mr. Stevie Rogers to the stand.
Okay, Mr. Rogers, good morning, afternoon, whatever it is, wherever you are. Plaintiff, you may proceed whenever you're ready.
Yes, Your Honor. Good morning. Could you please introduce yourself to the jury?
Good morning. I'm Stevie Rogers.
Can you tell us a little bit about why you're here today?
It's pretty simple, really. I just want justice for my grandmother.
And who is your grandmother?
She was Agatha Lee, the famous author. Most of you probably read her book, Death in a Bottle, at some point in a high school English class. It's still taught across the country today.
Were you and your grandmother close?
We were. We fell out of touch for a while, but eventually reunited after years apart. We were even living together when she passed.
Did you always live with your grandmother?
Not always. I moved in July of 2018. And to be quite honest with you, it was the closest thing to home that I'd felt in a while.
What do you mean by that?
For the first 20 years of my life, I lived in a loving and caring home. I had 2 brilliant and kind parents who dedicated their lives to family. But all of that changed in 2008.
Did something happen in 2008 that changed how your family operated?
Yes. My parents were killed. A drunk driver smashed into our car after a 4th of July cookout.
To 403, more prejudicial than probative. May I be heard?
Yes.
Your Honor, for evidence to be inadmissible under Rule 403, the prejudicial value must substantially outweigh its probative value. While the probative value might be to establish that the death of this witness's parents caused his relationship with his grandma to deteriorate, this testimony has the prejudicial value of getting the jury to feel for this witness rather than make their decision based off of the facts on this case. Opposing counsel can get out the same evidence they need without that prejudicial value by simply saying that the death of Miss Rogers' parents caused them to distance himself from his grandmother.
Response from the plaintiff?
Yes, Your Honor. Opposing counsel is right in the fact that this is being used to explain the relationship between Mr. Stevie Rogers and his grandmother and how that evolved over time and how that eventually led to Mr. Rogers coming back to be with his grandmother. However, Rule 403 specifically states unfair prejudice in terms of its admissibility, and there is no unfair prejudice caused by Mr. Rogers explaining why he was no longer close or living with his grandmother.
All right, so I'm going to overrule the objection, but plaintiff, let's not spend too much time on this or delve too deeply into it. The objection's overruled for now.
Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Rogers, what did you do after your parents passed?
Well, I did whatever I could to numb the pain of losing them. They left me a trust fund, so I traveled around, I drank, I even tried law school for a little while. I mean, anything to keep my mind occupied.
And during this point in time, how was your relationship with your grandmother?
We didn't talk much. It was just too hard. Every time I thought of Nana, my mind instantly went to my dead mother.
And at this point, what was your life like?
It was tough. Eventually, beginning in 2017, I checked myself into a residential treatment clinic. It was
Objection, Your Honor. I re-raise my objection to under Rule 403, more prejudicial than probative.
Plaintiff, what's the probative value of this particular testimony?
Yes, Your Honor. Opposing counsel in their opening statement made it very clear that they're claiming the reason why Mr. Rogers came back to visit her grandmother was because he ran out of money and was looking for his grandmother for money. This is direct testimony in direct contradiction to that. And if I may proffer into what Mr. Rogers will tell us, Mr. Rogers is going to tell us that it was based off of his rehabilitation that he decided that he wanted to reconnect with his only family. This evidence is in direct contradiction to the claims and allegations that the defense is raising against Mr. Rogers.
How closely connected in time were the leaving of this, the witness leaving this program, which I'm sure that's what you're going to get to, and showing up to his grandmother's house? How connected are they in terms of time?
It was right afterwards, Your Honor. And if I may proffer again, Mr. Rogers will tell us that it was in rehab when he made that decision. And then after he got out, he decided to reconnect with his grandmother.
And if you just proffer, how long would this witness have been in that program?
I believe it was 60 days.
Okay. Response from the defense?
Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Rogers can establish that the relationship deteriorated with their grandmother after the death of their parents without referring to the severity of their depression caused by their parents' death. This evidence is being used to get the members of the jury to vote based purely off of their emotions rather than the facts of the case.
Okay. So, plaintiff, you can get into the fact that the witness went to rehab. I think we've already heard that fact. The witness can tell us how long they were there, and in relation to that, when they showed back up at Miss Lee's house to re-enter her life. But I don't want any details in terms of addiction, depression, the causes of that. We've heard enough on that. So the objection is sustained in part.
Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Rogers, how long were you in rehab?
As I was saying before, I checked myself in early 2018, and I was part of this 60-day treatment program that included therapy on dealing with my parents' death.
And after you got out of rehab, did you ever reconnect with your grandmother?
I did. Aside from a few letters, we hadn't really communicated for a while, and the last address I had for Nana was the old family home in Monroeville, Alabama, but she had apparently moved away some time back.
Well, how were you able to reconnect with her if you didn't know where she lived?
Well, I hired an investigator to find her. I gave her all the letters Nana had sent me over the years and a few photos of the two of us together. Apparently, the investigator found that Nana was living in Midlands.
And did you ever go and visit your grandmother?
I did. I showed up on Nana's door exactly 10 years after the accident, and I burst into tears right when I saw her.
How did your grandmother respond to seeing you?
The same way that she always had, with open arms.
Well, at the time that you moved back in with your grandmother, was she living alone?
No, Nana was also living with a housekeeper, Drew Mars.
Now, you said that Mr. Mars, the defendant, was your grandmother's housekeeper. Were you aware of what that job entailed?
Yeah, Mars kept the house tidy. Mars would drive Nana to her appointments, and Mars was also in charge of Nana's medication.
What medication?
I really couldn't tell you. Nana was always so proud and really didn't like discussing the medicines she took more than she needed to. The business.
Objection, Your Honor, to speculation.
Do me a favor, defense counsel. What statement exactly are you contending was speculative?
Specifically the fact that Miss Lee was too proud to talk about her medications. She could have not wanted to talk about her medications for other reasons, for like self-protection or something.
Okay. Response from the plaintiff?
Yes, Your Honor. The statement that Nana was always so proud is not a statement that is going into the mindset of Miss Agatha Lee, rather Mr. Rogers' lay witness opinion being her grandson and living with her grandmother.
Objection overruled.
Mr. Rogers, what do you mean by medication?
Like I was saying, I wasn't really sure the medications that Nana took. She was a very proud and independent woman and didn't like discussing them with people that she didn't feel she needed to. That business stayed between Nana and Mars.
You mentioned to us earlier that when you moved in, your grandmother, she accepted you with open arms. What was that like after the first day you moved back in?
It felt like I had family again. The two of us played backgammon together. We watched Nana's daytime stories together, and we even cooked together from time to time.
How was your relationship with the defendant, Drew Mars?
Not so great. I remember on my 31st birthday, Mars asked when I planned on moving out. And it wasn't the first time that Mars had asked me something like that, and it certainly wasn't the last time.
And now I'd like to flash forward to August 14th. Can you walk us through how that day began?
Sure. Well, it began like most others. I got up, went for a run, and when I got back, I brought Nana her breakfast. I was telling her about this tech startup in town that I thought would be a good investment, but Nana wasn't as certain. She said she didn't want to and that she was going to pass.
What else did you two talk about?
Well, right after turning down the investment idea, Nana looked at me in the eyes and she said that she loved me. She said that she was proud of me and the work that we'd done to reconnect. And then tears started welling up in her eyes, and that's when she said she was leaving her estate to me.
Did that surprise you?
Of course. She had told me a while back that she was leaving everything to Mars. I was stunned that she had changed her mind.
Now, have you ever seen the will that left everything to the defendant, Drew Mars?
No, not at the time. Nana had mentioned it in a letter a while back, but I had never seen the will.
And during that conversation with your grandmother, was it then that she changed her will?
No, she was going to schedule a meeting with her attorney later in the week.
Objection, Your Honor, to speculation.
Response?
Yes, Your Honor. I believe these are referring to conversations that she had with Miss Agatha Lee, statements that she was going to schedule a meeting with her attorney to change it and not jumping into the mind of Miss Lee. And if you'd like, Your Honor, we can lay that foundation.
Yeah, lay a little bit more foundation. The objection is sustained for now.
Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Rogers, you mentioned that your grandmother was planning to schedule a meeting with her attorney. Did she tell you that?
She did when we were talking about her changing the will on August 14th. She said she was going to schedule a meeting with her attorney.
Now, you mentioned that the defendant was the initial inheritor of Miss Lee's estate. Were you aware of whether or not the defendant knew about this sudden change?
Anna didn't have to let Mars know. When we left the study, Mars was waiting right outside, and she was breathing shallowly.
Objection, Your Honor, to lack of personal knowledge.
Response from the plaintiff?
Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Rogers, who was in the room and walked out of the room, would most certainly have personal knowledge of whether or not the defendant was waiting outside, as when he left the door, the defendant was waiting outside.
Your Honor, may I be heard?
You may.
My objection is specifically to the context of the question. What was stated was that Ms. Lee didn't have to tell Ms. Mars directly that she was going to change her will again because Ms. Mars should have heard the entire conversation. And the reason why they're saying that is because this witness is testifying that he saw Ms. Mars outside of the door after the conversation had been completed. So there's no way that this witness can testify to whether or not Ms. Mars heard the conversation because there was a door closed. He can only testify to whether or not he saw
Okay.
Ms. Mars outside the door afterwards.
Okay, thank you, counsel. Last response from the plaintiff.
Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Rogers is just about to testify to exactly how he was able to know that the defendant heard this conversation.
Okay, so objection sustained for now. In part, we're going to strike the statement. I believe it was something to the effect of she didn't have to be told. That statement is stricken. The rest of the answer will stand, and plaintiff, continue with your examination.
Well, when you saw the defendant waiting outside, did the defendant say anything to you?
Well, her face was flushed and red, and she was clenching her fists like this. And as she was taking Nana down the hall to one of her appointments, Mars turned back at me and just mouthed, "No way."
Objection, Your Honor, to speculation.
Defense counsel, go ahead and explain your objection a little more.
Yes, Your Honor. We just heard from this witness that no voice came out when words were mouthed. It could be that Ms. Mars was saying "hooray" or "go away" or any other words. However, because there was no sound, we can't be sure that's what she mouthed. We'd have to read the mind to figure that out.
A response from the plaintiff.
Yes, Your Honor. We're not stepping inside the mind of the defendant. Rather, this is what Mr. Rogers perceived the defendant mouth back to him.
Okay, objection overruled.
So after the defendant and your grandmother left the house, were you still at the house?
Yeah, I stayed back for a while and took a shower and got dressed. I called Nana's favorite florist in town and actually ordered a bouquet of her favorite flowers, some sunflowers and pink roses.
Around what time did your grandmother and the defendant get back?
Mid-afternoon. Nana and I watched one of those old Alex Grace movies. It's one of Nana's favorite actors. And then we settled down for an early dinner.
And where was the defendant at the time you were eating dinner with your grandmother?
Well, Mars came in and delivered dinner and said that she was going to sleep. It was about 6 o'clock.
And about what time did you head to bed that night?
A little while later at 9:30, I went downstairs on my way to bed, and actually on my way back up, I saw Drew Mars.
Would you recognize a copy of a layout of your house if I were to show it to you?
I think so, yes.
Your Honor, permission to share screen what has already been entered into evidence as Exhibit 5.
No objection, Your Honor.
Mr. Rogers, what am I showing you?
This is just a floor plan of the upstairs of Nana's house.
Does this appear to have been changed or altered in any way?
It doesn't.
Well, Mr. Rogers, can you show us where you saw the defendant that night?
Certainly. So I was standing here at the bottom of the stairs, and I saw Drew Mars standing outside of her bedroom right here.
And what was the defendant doing?
Well, Mars was walking towards Nana's room and had her hand clasped and raised like this, almost like she was holding something.
Now, Mr. Rogers, was this the last time that you saw your grandmother?
I didn't see her alive again after we said goodnight that night. Mars came in the next morning and said Nana wasn't breathing.
What did you do next?
I did what anyone would do. I called the police. But I've heard some bad things about the Midlands police before, and so I decided to call an investigator.
Objection, Your Honor, to hearsay.
What hearsay statement was elicited? Say more, counsel.
I've heard some bad things about the Midlands Police Department.
Okay, response from the plaintiff.
Yes, Your Honor, this is not hearsay because we're not using it for the truth of the matter asserted, rather the subsequent action of Mr. Rogers calling a private investigator.
Objection overruled.
Mr. Rogers, you mentioned you hired a private investigator. Did that private investigator show up?
Yes, she did. She took a look around and told me that she could have some answers eventually. And that's all I wanted was answers, closure. I had just suddenly lost the only family that I had left.
Did you ever get that closure?
I did. It turns out that Nana had an allergic reaction to some sort of medication.
And did you know that your grandmother had any allergies?
I found out in August.
What about the defendant? And did the defendant know about your grandmother's allergy?
She did. Mars told me that she knew about Nana's allergy.
Thank you, Your Honor. At this time, I have no further questions.
All right, thank you, counsel. Cross-examination from the defense. You may begin whenever you are ready.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Rogers, I want to talk a little bit about some of the things that you said on your direct examination. You said that you wrote your grandmother letters. Am I correct in saying that?
No, actually, Nana would write to me, but every time I try to write back, it just got too hard.
So you never responded to your grandmother's letters, right?
No, ma'am. I'm ashamed to admit it, but I was in no place.
Ms. Cornforth, could you please bring up Exhibit 4? Now, this is the Lee Manor, correct?
It is, yes.
And you were living at the Lee Manor at the time of your grandmother's death?
Yes, ma'am.
Now, Mr. Rogers, you previously testified to a layout of that manor, correct?
The upstairs, yes, ma'am.
Ms. Cornforth, could you please bring up the upstairs layout? Thank you, Ms. Cornforth. So you testified that you were standing at the bottom of the stairs, correct?
That's right, yes, ma'am.
And you said that you saw Ms. Mars standing at the top of those stairs, correct?
No, more like in front of her bedroom door, right by her bedroom.
All right. Then you said that you saw Ms. Mars head towards Agatha's bedroom, correct?
That's right.
Now, also in the direction of Agatha's bedroom is the bathroom, right?
I guess so. It's sort of to the left of Nana's bedroom.
Well, also on the other side of where Mars's bedroom is Agatha's study, correct?
That's right. It's on the opposite wall.
There were other rooms on the other side of the wall compared to Miss Mars's bedroom, correct?
That's right. But Mars was walking in a straight line towards Nana's bedroom. She wasn't walking through the sitting area or walking against the stairway to the guest bathroom. She was walking in a straight line towards Nana's bedroom.
But you're correct in saying that there is a guest bathroom directly before Miss Lee's bathroom, Miss Lee's bedroom, correct?
That's right, but it doesn't look like you can access it through the hallway. You have to either go through the bedroom or through the study.
All right, thank you, Ms. Cornforth. You can take down the exhibit. Now, Mr. Rogers, on July 4th of 2018, you visited your grandmother for the first time in 8 years.
That's right. Yes.
Before walking through her door, you had never held a regular job.
That's right. I hadn't.
Before walking through her door, your trust fund had run dry.
Yes, ma'am. I'd spent the last little bit that I had checking myself into that rehabilitation clinic.
Well, before walking through her door, you understood that your grandmother had actually disinherited you.
That's right. I knew that.
Now, despite disinheriting you, your grandmother let you live with her anyway, right?
That's right. Like I said, Nana welcomed me back into the family with open arms.
And you continued to live with her until she died on or about August 15th.
I did, yes.
And you know that your grandmother died due to an allergic reaction caused by an over-the-counter heartburn medication.
That's what the doctors say. Yes, ma'am.
Now, I want to talk to you about the day before your grandmother died. The day before your grandmother died, you were home alone for parts of the day.
That's right. On August 14th, I tidied up around the house and called Nana's favorite florist, like I said.
Well, you were aware of the severity of your grandmother's heartburn medication allergy, correct?
I was, yes.
You knew that the heartburn medication could be purchased at just about any pharmacy?
I guess so. I actually haven't been to the pharmacy in a while. I don't have my license anymore, but that's what people say.
So you knew that the heartburn medication could be purchased at just about any pharmacy?
I assume so. I don't know for certain.
Well, you knew that your grandmother had a weekly pill organizer by her bedside?
That was one of the few things that I actually did know about Nana's medication. I knew that Mars set out the medication every Saturday for her.
And you knew that she would take her assigned pills for each night before going to bed?
Yes, that's right.
You were aware that in Midlands, if someone is found responsible for the death of another, that same person becomes ineligible to receive any part of a decedent's estate.
Objection, Your Honor, to improper opinion may be heard.
You may.
Yes, opposing counsel is trying to elicit a legal conclusion or a legal opinion about a matter to which Mr. Rogers most certainly is not an expert in.
Response?
Yes, Your Honor. I'm simply asking this witness what he does and does not know about these laws. And if he doesn't know these laws, well, then the jury should know about that. However, I have it on a good faith basis that Mr. Rogers did in fact know about these laws before Miss Lee was found dead.
Okay, so I'm gonna sustain the objection as asked. You can re-ask the witness what his understanding of the law was at the time, but not whether it is in fact the law. I do agree that this witness's understanding of the law is certainly relevant to motive. Just make that little tweak and we can move forward.
Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Rogers, you understood at that time, if someone is found responsible for the death of another, that same person becomes ineligible to receive any part of a decedent's estate.
I did know that, yes.
Now let's talk about the day your grandmother was found dead. On the morning your grandmother was found dead, you called 911.
I did, right away.
You called 911 to report that your grandmother had been murdered.
That's right.
Now, to be clear, you told the police that she was murdered before you searched the house for evidence?
That's right. The day before, she was normal Nana. She was full of life and happy and energetic. And the next day she was gone.
Well, you told the police that she was murdered before any autopsy was conducted, right?
I actually didn't. I asked for an autopsy. I asked for a scan, an MRI, anything. I just wanted some closure. I wanted to know what happened.
But to be clear, Mr. Rogers, you told the police that your grandmother had been murdered before an autopsy had been conducted, right?
No, I don't believe so.
Well, you called 911 that morning, right?
Yes, ma'am.
And when you called 911, you reported that your grandmother had been murdered, right?
I think I said something had happened to my grandmother. She's not waking up. It looks like she's dead. Something might have happened to her.
Now, you told the police that your grandmother had been killed, correct?
That's right. I said maybe she'd been killed. Maybe she just passed. Maybe there was a terrible accident. I wasn't sure what had happened.
Well, you told the police that your grandmother had been killed before an autopsy was conducted, right?
Right. I was throwing out anything, any suggestion, anything. But the police, they said it was probably just an old woman who had died in her sleep.
But you yourself thought that your grandmother had been murdered before there was any autopsy conducted.
That's right. I was trying to get to the bottom of what happened. I just wanted answers. That's all.
Now, when you arrived, you insisted that a toxicology screening be performed on your grandmother.
That's right. I requested a toxicology screening, an MRI, a C scan, anything. I'm not a medical expert, but I was hoping any one of these things might reveal something as to why Nana died.
But you already knew what the toxicology screening was going to show, didn't you?
No, I wasn't sure what anything was going to show.
Mr. Rogers, do you have your deposition in front of you?
I believe so, yes.
Could I please have you turn to line 388?
Okay.
Now, when you were being deposed, you were told to be truthful, right?
That's right.
And you were truthful, weren't you?
Yes, I was.
You were told to be complete?
Yes.
And you were complete, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Now, please read silently from lines 388 to 391 as I read aloud. Oh, excuse me, lines 387 to 388. Now, August 20th of 2018, immediately after the lawyer read the will. Question, was that before or after the tox results? 388, the answer. Before, I already knew that what the tox screen was going to show. Did I read that correctly?
Yes, ma'am, you did. I apologize. I thought you were talking about when the police first arrived on August 15th. At that point, I didn't know what was going to be found, but later on, I thought maybe she was poisoned. So that's my apology. I thought you were referring to a different date.
Well, it isn't that you just thought that your grandmother had been poisoned, Mr. Rogers. You already knew what the tox screening was going to show, right?
Yeah, I had a feeling.
In fact, you filed this wrongful death suit against Ms. Mars before knowing the results of your grandmother's tox screening.
That's right. On August 20th, I did.
You insisted that a tox screen be performed on your grandmother because you wanted to show that Ms. Mars was responsible for her death.
That's right. And I wanted to get to the bottom of what happened. My parents had been taken away suddenly from me 10 years before, and it felt like the same thing was happening all over again. I just wanted some closure. That's all.
Well, Mr. Rogers, you specifically wanted to prove that Ms. Mars was responsible for her death, not anyone, Ms. Mars, right?
That's right. If it was Miss Mars, then I wanted the truth to come out about Miss Mars.
Well, let's talk about why you wanted to prove that Ms. Mars killed your grandmother. You understood that prior to your grandmother's death, Ms. Mars stood as the only heir to your grandmother's inheritance.
Officially, yes. Although Nana had said she was going to change her will on that day, August 14th.
Mr. Rogers, I'm not asking you about what your grandmother said to you. I'm asking you of what you were aware of. And you were aware that Ms. Mars was your grandmother's only heir at that point, correct?
That's right, officially, yes.
Well, today, Ms. Mars still stands as the only heir to your grandmother's inheritance.
Yes, that's right.
But you still have an opportunity to be your grandmother's heir again, right?
I'm not sure I know what you mean.
Well, it is your understanding that if the jury finds Miss Mars responsible for your grandmother's death, then you would become the heir again, right?
I guess so. I think I would get her estate. That's right.
Mr. Rogers, is it an I guess or I know? You know that if the jury comes back and says that Ms. Mars was responsible for your grandmother's death, then you would be the heir again.
Ma'am, I know that, but I want to be honest and frank.
No further questions.
Your Honor, I'd like to ask the witness to be allowed to finish his answer.
I hear you, counsel. You can redirect to allow the witness to explain if the witness wants to explain further.
Yes, Your Honor. Brief redirect, Your Honor.
You may proceed.
Mr. Rogers, do you remember being asked about what you know of the drug chloroandramine?
Yes, I do.
On August 14th, did you ever go to a pharmacy?
No, sir.
Have you ever purchased chloroandramine?
No, sir.
Were you aware of whether or not Miss Lee took any drugs that looked similar to chloroandramine?
I don't know. I really didn't know the medications that Nana was taking.
Thank you, Your Honor. I have no further questions.
All right, thank you, counsel. Does the plaintiff have any more witnesses they'd like to call, or any further evidence to present?
No, Your Honor. At this time, the plaintiff rests its case in chief.
All right, thank you, counsel. So we will now take a 5-minute break. Judges, please remember that this video is being publicly broadcast via YouTube live stream. See you all again shortly.
Before we break into breakout rooms, I just wanted to make everybody aware that our timekeeper was kicked off of the Zoom in the middle of the meeting. So another person took over the time. So we can add those times together, but I was curious if the plaintiff had a time for our attorney, just in case we were off a little bit.
Yes, I have a time, and I'm still in contact with the timekeeper.
Oh, perfect. Okay, sorry about that. Thank you.
Thank you.
I believe your timekeeper is back in the room now, right?
Yes, I am. Thank you.
Okay, wonderful. So we'll now take that 5-minute break. Judges, please remember that this video is being publicly live streamed.
Bailiff Lacrone, is it possible that I could be moved into the breakout room with my team?
Can I go ahead and get a check that all the judges are back? Either send me a message or turn on your video and give me a thumbs up, one or the other. Okay. I think that, sorry, the video's moved around on me. I think that was everybody. So Judge Hughes, I am going to go ahead and bring the students back in, or invite them to join back in. Here they come. Okay. I think that should be everybody, and I will turn it back over to Judge Hughes.
All right, thank you. So everyone is back and ready to go, it seems. Defense, please call your first witness.
The defense calls Ms. Mars to the stand.
Okay, Ms. Mars. You may proceed whenever you're ready, counsel.
Please state your name for the record.
My name is Drew Mars.
Ms. Mars, what do you do for a living?
I'm not currently employed, but prior to last year, I had been Agatha Lee's caretaker for 10 years.
What was it like being Miss Lee's caretaker?
It was like caring for family. It never felt like a job. We ate together, played games together, and celebrated holidays together. Almost every year we went on vacation of some kind, and let me tell you, a few years ago, Agatha took some spicy pictures in the Caribbean. Being Agatha's caretaker was honestly the best job someone could ask for, you know? I was with her through the bad stuff too. The days she didn't feel well, where she felt lonely, even the days she would try to contact her grandson, Stevie, but never got a response. Those were really hard.
What did you do as Miss Lee's caretaker?
I did a variety of things for Agatha, most of which were necessary for her recovery after her heart attack, like organizing her medication for the week, doing cleaning, and just generally taking care of her.
You mentioned that Miss Lee had a pill organizer. What did her pill organizer look like on the morning of the 15th?
Her pill organizer showed that she had taken her pills for the night before, just like she was supposed to. I found Miss Lee on that Wednesday morning, and the pills for Tuesday night were gone, which means she must have taken them.
Are you aware of what caused Miss Lee's death?
Yes. I don't know if I've ever had to do anything harder than reading her toxicology report, but somehow I got through it. Her tox screening showed that she died from an allergic reaction to chlorandramine, which she knew she was allergic to.
Was chlorandramine purposely kept in Miss Lee's pill organizer?
No, God, no. We didn't even keep it in the house. Agatha knew that she was severely allergic to it, and that it was one of the first things I learned when I took over as her caretaker. The only way she could have gotten heartburn medication from her pill organizer specifically is if it had been put there.
Objection, Your Honor, to speculation.
Response, counsel.
Your Honor, at this point, Ms. Mars isn't delving into the mindset of any witness, not talking about their emotions or what they thought. She's specifically talking about whether or not Miss Lee could have taken chlorandramine from her pill organizer specifically. And she said that it's not possible unless someone put that pill, the chlorandramine pill, in her pill organizer. That isn't speculation, and it's admissible in today's trial.
Objection sustained.
Ms. Mars, did you switch Miss Lee's pills?
No, I loved Agatha. God, I know my job was to be her caretaker, but she looked after me just as much as I did her. I owed her so much for everything that she did for me, and I would never betray her like that.
Do you know who, living in the manor leading up to Miss Lee's death, knew about her heartburn medication allergy?
Well, Agatha knew, of course, and so did I. I also told her grandson, Stevie, about the allergy as soon as he showed up in the manor. I was just trying to do my job, but looking back on it now, I wish I'd never told him that.
You said that Mr. Rogers showed up at the manor. What do you mean by that?
Basically just that. One day in July of 2018, Stevie just showed up. Didn't call or write, just knocked on the door. But when he showed up, Agatha, bless her heart, just let him in. And Stevie ended up living with us after that.
What did Miss Lee and Mr. Rogers' relationship look like after Mr. Rogers moved into the manor?
They spent a lot of time together catching up. Agatha appeared happier than I'd ever seen her, and I was happy for her too. Her only family had finally decided to come for a visit. The only time I actually heard them argue was the day before I found Agatha gone.
Do you know what they were arguing about?
Yes. I overheard them arguing, and Stevie had asked Agatha if she would put him back in the will. Agatha said that she loved Stevie, but that she wouldn't give him a penny of her inheritance. Not that I knew after she died.
To hearsay.
Okay, so there was a little bit of crosstalk there. Can you specify what the specific statement is that you're objecting to?
Yes, to the statements of Agatha Lee saying that she loved him and that she would not be changing the will.
Okay, response?
Yes, Your Honor. Hearsay is an out-of-court statement being used to prove the truth of the matter asserted. The statement made by Miss Agatha Lee that she would not give Mr. Rogers a single penny of the inheritance, not then, not ever, would fall under an exception to hearsay, which is 8033, a then existing mental, emotional, or physical condition. Ms. Lee's statements show her intent to not give her grandson the inheritance. That was her plan.
Okay, response from the plaintiff?
Yes, Your Honor. Specifically as to 8033 of a plan to do something, these statements in and of itself are not statements of her plan to do something, rather what she told the plaintiff, Mr. Stevie Rogers. And unless they can lay foundation that leads to an action of that plan or anything that lays foundation for a plan under Rule 8033, then those statements are still inadmissible and don't fall under 8033.
Okay, the objection is overruled. The statements will be admitted for the limited purpose of explaining the declarant's intent or plan and for the effect on the listener. So the statements are admitted for those limited purposes.
Yes.
Ms. Mars, I'm showing you what has been marked as Exhibit 9. Ms. Cornforth, could you please pull up Exhibit 9? What is it?
That's Agatha's will. I saw it after she told me that she wanted to leave her inheritance to me.
Is it a fair and accurate copy of Ms. Lee's will?
Yes.
The defense offers Exhibit 9 into evidence.
Any objection, counsel?
No objections, Your Honor.
Okay, Exhibit 9 is admitted.
Now, Ms. Mars, what parts of the will, if any, specifically mention Mr. Rogers?
Only one. It says, so long as Drew Mars survives me, I specifically intend to exclude my grandchild, Stevie Rogers, from receiving any benefit from my estate or under this will.
Now, what happened after their argument?
Stevie left the room and saw me standing outside of it. Once Agatha was out of earshot, Stevie gave me this glare and told me, don't count your millions just yet.
Thank you, Ms. Mars. I have no further questions.
Oops, let me unmute. Thank you, counsel. Cross-examination. You may begin whenever you're ready.
Yes, Your Honor. Ms. Mars, I'd like to pick up kind of where you left off, talking about Agatha Lee's will, if that's all right.
Of course.
And as you just mentioned, you were originally going to get everything in Agatha Lee's estate.
Yes. Back in February of 2018, that's when Agatha told me that she wanted me to be the heir.
Now, you were here today when the plaintiff, Mr. Stevie Rogers, was testifying.
Yes, I was here for that.
And so you were here in court today when Mr. Rogers said that Agatha Lee was going to change the will and leave everything to him.
Yes, that's what he was claiming.
And to be clear, this conversation took place on August 14th.
Yes, sometime around 11 that day.
And you also heard a conversation at the exact same time.
Yes, I heard a conversation that was very different from what Mr. Rogers said.
Let's talk about where you were during this conversation, Miss Mars, because you weren't in the room, were you?
No, I was standing outside of the door during that conversation.
And that door was closed.
Yes, it was.
And you would agree with me that when you heard statements from Miss Lee, well, she was whispering.
She was whispering, yes, but I could hear her through the door.
And you claim today that, Miss Lee, she said she wasn't going to change her will at all. Isn't that right?
That's correct. She told Stevie that she wouldn't put Stevie back in the will, that she wanted Stevie to be able to stand on his own 2 feet, care for himself.
Well, then let's talk a little bit about what happened right after that conversation took place. Miss Mars, you took the Miss Agatha Lee out to lunch. Isn't that right?
Yes, she was meeting Miss Cabrera for lunch at some steak place.
And when you were taking her out to lunch, you heard Miss Agatha Lee, she took a phone call.
Yes, she was on the phone with her attorney.
That's right. A person named Kirby.
Yes, Kirby Doolittle.
And that's right. And you're aware of the fact that Kirby Doolittle, that's the attorney that was responsible for changing her will over to you, right?
No, I'm aware that Kirby was her personal attorney.
That's right, Miss Mars. Kirby Doolittle, that's the personal attorney from Miss Agatha Lee.
Yes, that's correct.
Kirby Doolittle, that's the only personal attorney of Miss Agatha Lee.
That I'm aware of.
And right after you heard this conversation between Miss Lee and her attorney, well, the first thing you did was go straight to a pharmacy.
No, I dropped Agatha off at lunch first.
That's right. And then your very next stop was to a pharmacy.
Yes, I had to pick up some toiletries for myself.
Now, you're familiar with Agatha Lee's medication, right?
Of course I am. I dealt with her medication for the entire 10 years that I worked for her.
And so you're aware that she has an allergy to a drug known as chloroandramine.
Of course. That was the first thing that I was told when I took the job. That's actually what caused her heart attack early in 2008.
We'll get to that heart attack in just a second, Miss Mars, but you'd agree with me that this drug, chloroandramine, that's a drug you can pick up at any old drugstore.
Yes, it's used for heartburn relief.
You don't need a prescription to get this drug.
No, it's just an over-the-counter medication.
You don't even need to show any identification to purchase this drug either, isn't that right?
That's correct.
And Miss Mars, you don't have any receipts from that trip to the pharmacy that day, do you?
No, I didn't have a reason to take one.
Well, let's dive into chloroandramine for a second. You'd agree with me that that drug looks awfully similar to a drug known as Winterin, isn't that right?
Yes, Winterin is an arthritis medication that is purple and circular. It looks identical when you're looking at it. The only difference between chlorandramine and Winterin is the chemical compounds found within them.
That's right. And you're aware of the fact that these two drugs look identically, right?
Yes.
You're also aware that Miss Agatha Lee, well, she took that other drug every single day.
Yes, she took Winterin for arthritis. She was given that prescription in 2015.
Let's talk a little bit about that heart attack that you mentioned earlier. You were familiar with that event?
Of course, that's why I was hired. After Agatha had her heart attack, she had subsequent organ damage and needed rehabilitation. So she chose to do that at home with live-in caretakers.
Well, let's talk a little bit more specifically about that heart attack. Miss Mars, you were aware of the fact that when she had that heart attack, she took 1 pill of chlorandramine.
Yes, my understanding is that the heart attack was caused by an allergic reaction to 250 milligrams of chlorandramine.
And then let's fast forward to today. You would agree with me that this time, Miss Agatha Lee ingested twice that dose.
Yes, that's correct. That was what was on the toxicology report.
And to be clear, on that day, you noticed that she took some pills from her pill container.
Yes, she had taken Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday medications, which included her vitamins as well as her Winterin.
That's right. That means on Tuesday, she was supposed to take 2 pills that looked exactly like chlorandramine.
Yes, she was supposed to take her Winterin. But the toxicology report showed that she hadn't had it in about 24 hours, which means that she didn't take the Winterin. So someone had to have swapped it with chlorandramine.
Of course, Miss Mars. And you'd agree with me that the police, they found chlorandramine inside of Lee Manor, didn't they?
Yes, I was just as shocked as they were when they found it. I don't know how it got there.
Well, let's talk about where it was and how it got there, Miss Mars. You would agree with me that chlorandramine, that was found in your room?
Yes, it was found in a bag in my closet. Agatha often put things in my closet for storage. I don't know when the bag got there, but that is where it was found.
Well, Miss Mars, you'd agree with me, your fingerprints were found on that bag, weren't they?
One fingerprint was found on it. I guess I must have touched it at some point while going through my closet. I'm not quite sure when that would have happened, though. I really don't remember ever seeing it, honestly.
Thank you, Your Honor. I have no further questions.
All right, thank you, counsel. Any redirect from the defense?
No, Your Honor.
Okay, Ms. Mars, you may return to your virtual counsel table. Does the defense have a second witness they'd like to call?
Yes, Your Honor. Defense calls Ms. Cabrera to the stand.
Okay, Ms. Cabrera, we see you there. Counsel, you may proceed whenever you're ready.
Please state your name for the court.
Hi, my name is Ryan Cabrera.
What do you do for a living, Ms. Cabrera?
I'm a writer. I started with music and released 2 singles, Teardrops on My Piano, and We Are Definitely Getting Back Together. Needless to say, they were not hits, so I switched to books.
Do you know who Agatha Lee is?
Of course, don't everybody? I've written some biographies of some pretty famous people, but I was most excited to be working on this Agatha Lee's, especially since she pretty much dropped off the face of the earth after publishing 1 book, Death in a Bottle.
Well, let's back up, Ms. Cabrera. You mentioned you were writing Miss Lee's biography. How'd you first meet her?
Well, I wrote her a letter. I made my case for why she should let me write her biography, even though she'd probably gotten hundreds of offers before. Took her about 3 years, but she finally responded in 2018, and I moved on up to Midlands.
What was your relationship like with the victim, Miss Lee?
Well, really, I was, interviewing her for my book, but it didn't really feel like work. I mean, Miss Agatha became more like a dear friend of mine than just the subject of my book.
What did a typical interview entail?
We talked about books and played games, and I also met her caretaker, Drew Mars. She lived with Agatha at Lee Manor. With a caretaker, at first I thought that Miss Agatha must not have any family, but then she told me about Stevie.
You just mentioned someone named Stevie. Who's that?
Stevie is Agatha's only grandchild. At first, Agatha didn't really like to talk about him, but she opened up more and more as time went on.
Based on your observation, what was their relationship like?
Agatha seemed so proud of Stevie when she finally opened up about him. She told me about all the time they used to spend together, about how smart Stevie was. But after his mom and dad died in a car accident, Stevie changed.
What do you mean the plaintiff changed?
Well, I learned that Stevie abandoned Agatha. He didn't call or visit or write. I could see the pain on Miss Agatha's face when she told me. She looked like she was going to cry. But like the true Southern woman she is, instead of crying, she just pulled out a box labeled Dunhill, pulled out a cigarette, and lit it up.
You just mentioned you saw Miss Lee smoking. Would you recognize the box of cigarettes if I showed it to you today?
Of course, honey, I couldn't forget it. I was so shocked.
Miss Cornforth, could you please pull up Exhibit 16? I'm showing you what has already been entered as Exhibit 16. Do you recognize this?
Yeah, that's the same box that Miss Agatha had at lunch.
Miss Cornforth, you can take down Exhibit 16. I'd like to talk about the last time you saw Miss Lee. When was the last time you saw the victim?
August 14th, 2018. I met Miss Agatha for lunch that day.
Miss Cabrera, can you tell us what happened at lunch?
I mean, Miss Agatha seemed quiet and less energetic than usual. I asked what was wrong. Miss Agatha said, Stevie asked me for something this morning. I had to say no.
Objection, Your Honor. Hearsay.
Right, response?
Your Honor, this falls under an exception to hearsay, Rule 8033, specifically the end of Rule 8033, where statements of memory or belief to prove the memory or belief, it pertains specifically pertaining to a will. The statement is Miss Lee remembering something about the terms of her will.
Okay, do you want to give me an offer of proof as to exactly how this will connect to the terms of the will? Thus far, we only have a kind of vague statement, so give me an offer of proof.
Yes, Your Honor, under Rule 104, when the admissibility of a statement is dependent on the validity of a certain fact, we don't need to look at the facts in the specific statement, but we should consider the totality of the circumstances. And today, the totality of those circumstances would be the fact that today we heard Mr. Rogers had a conversation asking Miss Lee to be put back into the will, and she said no. Miss Mars also testified to that fact. So the totality would be that this statement is pertaining to those terms.
Okay, so you have no further, you have no offer of proof concerning evidence that will come from this witness specifically connecting this statement to the terms of the will. Do I have that right?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, response from the plaintiff?
Yes, Your Honor. There has been no foundation laid that this witness, in regards to this conversation, was aware that this was in regards to Agatha's will. There has been no foundation laid. This was, in fact, in regards to Agatha's will. Well, we admit there has been mention of a past conversation about that context. There is no way for the jury to be certain that that context is indeed being referenced here today through the conversation of Ms. Cabrera at that time.
Your Honor, may I respond?
Mr. Hayward, do you agree with the defense's recollection of the evidence that other witnesses talked about this conversation concerning the will happening on the same day?
Your Honor, while we agree that the previous witnesses mentioned a conversation happening, there has been no foundation that this conversation was that same conversation.
Okay, last response.
Your Honor, we're not stating that this was the same conversation, but this statement is pertaining to that prior conversation. You heard from two witnesses about the conversation pertaining to Ms. Rogers and Ms. Lee, and you heard from Ms. Mars that Ms. Lee called the attorney on the way to lunch. Both of these are the totality of the state circumstances under Rule 104 that would imply that this statement said to Ms. Cabrera by the victim is referring to the terms of the will.
Okay, so the objection is overruled based on the other evidence that we've heard. There's proof sufficient to support a finding that the conversation that Ms. Cabrera is speaking of was connected to the will. Certainly there's a question of weight there, and plaintiff, you can address that if you choose in closing argument.
Yes, Your Honor.
Ms. Cabrera, you were in the middle of saying something. Could you please finish?
Well, yeah, I was just saying that I was concerned about Agatha. So I asked her if something was wrong. She said, Stevie asked me for something. I had to say no. I hope I made the right decision and that Stevie can find a way to forgive me.
Ms. Cabrera, did Ms. Lee ever say what it was the plaintiff wanted?
No.
Well, let me ask you about something specifically. Are you aware that the victim had a will?
Yeah, Miss Lee told me about her will in one of our meetings, and then later I saw it.
So at lunch on the 14th, did Miss Lee ever say she would be putting the plaintiff in her will?
Oh, no. I'm sorry if I confused you. We never talked about the will that day. When I saw the will, it was months before that.
No further question, Your Honor.
Thank you, counsel. Cross-examination from the plaintiff. You may begin whenever you're ready.
Yes, Your Honor. Ms. Cabrera, I'd like to start by talking about that meeting on August 14th.
Okay.
Now, you mentioned on your direct examination that Agatha seemed upset at that meeting.
Yeah, she just seemed more quiet than she had normally been, so I was concerned about her.
And when you asked her about this, she mentioned a conversation with Stevie, correct?
Yeah, like I said, she told me that she had to tell Stevie no when he asked for something.
And to be clear, you don't know what Stevie asked for.
Oh, no, sir, I don't know for sure.
You don't even know when that conversation between Stevie and Miss Lee happened.
No, sir, that's not true. I know when the conversation happened.
Miss Cabrera, is it your testimony today that you know when Miss Lee said that to Stevie?
Yes, sir. She said Stevie asked me for something this morning. I had to tell him no. So the conversation was that morning.
Allow me to be more clear. You don't know the specific time at which that happened.
I mean, like what time in the morning? No, I just know it was that day before we met for lunch.
So it could have been at 7 a.m.?
I suppose it could have been, though I've never known Miss Lee to be an early riser.
And it could have been at 11 a.m.
Well, I don't think so, because they would have had to leave by that time to get to lunch. But yeah, you're right. I don't know when it happened in the morning, just that it was in the morning.
You also don't know if anyone else was present at that conversation.
Miss Lee didn't say anybody else was or wasn't.
So let's talk about what you do know. You know that Miss Lee had a meeting scheduled for Friday, correct? August 17th.
Well, yeah, I asked Miss Lee if she wanted to get lunch on Friday, and she said that she had a meeting with her attorney scheduled for that day, so she wouldn't be able to make that.
That's right. She told you it was a meeting with her attorney.
She did, yes.
Now, unfortunately, Miss Lee was found dead the morning of 15th, correct?
I believe so, sir, yes.
So she died before she was able to make that meeting with her attorney.
Oh, darling, I can't say for sure. I don't know. I mean, for all I know, she could have changed her mind and went right over there after our lunch.
Well, Miss Cabrera, you know she told you that she couldn't meet Friday because of an appointment.
Yes, sir. I said yes to all that stuff. All I'm saying is that I don't know that Miss Lee didn't actually meet with her attorney earlier.
Well, Miss Lee never conveyed to you that she would have been available to meet Friday.
I never talked to Miss Lee after our lunch, so no, she didn't.
Now, you're also aware that Miss Lee had named her caretaker, Drew Mars, as her sole beneficiary.
Yes, sir.
In fact, as you mentioned, Agatha showed you a copy of that will.
Yes, she did.
And when she showed you a copy of that will, Drew Mars was actually in the room
Yeah, she was in the room, yes.
while you and Agatha were talking about this will.
Well, Agatha just told me that showed me the wills, and yes, Drew was in there.
And you attended Agatha's will reading, correct?
Yes, sir, I did.
And Drew Mars was also in attendance?
Yes, sir.
And when Agatha's will was announced, Drew acted pretty surprised.
Yeah, and I gotta be honest, I was pretty confused because, Drew was in the room when Miss Lee showed me those wills. So, yeah, it was kind of odd.
That's right. You thought it was odd that Drew would deny having that knowledge?
I mean, yes, like I just said, yes.
Now, let's talk a little bit more about after Agatha's will reading. You had a conversation with Drew Mars, correct? Sometime later.
Are you asking about a specific time? I had a lot of conversations with Drew.
Well, is it your testimony that you had multiple conversations with Drew Mars following Agatha's will reading?
Well, sir, we were all in the room, so we continued talking on that day.
Ms. Cabrera, to be clear, I'm referring to after the day of Agatha's will reading.
Yes, I've talked to Drew Mars. I just didn't know if you were asking about a specific time.
You had a specific phone conversation with Drew Mars, correct?
Yes. If that's what you're referring to, that was about 2 months ago.
Mm-hmm. And on that phone call, Drew actually called you to ask if you would testify in this civil trial.
Yeah, Drew asked me if I'd be willing to testify.
And you agreed.
Yeah, I said that I'd be happy to.
Now, during that conversation, Drew Mars also offered to give you anything from Agatha's estate that you might like.
Yeah, Drew told me that she knew that Miss Lee was very fond of me and wanted to know if there was anything that I might like to remember her by.
And you asked for Agatha's book collection, correct?
Yes, sir, I did.
And you were aware that that contained all of Agatha's unpublished manuscripts.
Yes, sir, I was.
Now, you mentioned on your direct examination, you're a bit familiar with Agatha's work, Death in a Bottle.
Of course, sir. Who isn't? It sold over 65 million copies.
That's right. It's a pretty successful book, correct?
I mean, it was popular.
Now, you were set to gain all, and Drew agreed to give you all of her unpublished manuscripts, correct?
Drew, well, I mean, not exactly, because I didn't actually mention the unpublished works. I just mentioned the book collection. So Drew said that I could have the book collection, but she didn't know about the work, the unpublished stuff.
Well, to be clear for the members of the jury, the book collection contained those unpublished manuscripts.
Yes, sir, but Drew didn't know that.
That's right. You were the only person who had that knowledge.
Yes, sir, that's correct. Well, and Miss Lee.
Now, you never received a promise from anyone else from anything from Agatha's estate, correct?
Objection, Your Honor, relevance.
Your Honor, may I respond?
What's the relevance, counsel?
Yes, Your Honor, this goes directly to the credibility of the witness. If I may, the witness is only received any possible mention of compensation from the defense in today's case for who she is currently testifying.
Response?
Your Honor, this witness has never testified to any compensation or any sort of deal. And more so, counsel's specific question was, did anyone else offer you anything? This isn't relevant or make any other case in this make any other fact in today's case more or less likely if anyone outside the case was offering her something.
Okay. The relevance objection is overruled. The question was vague. I had that thought as well. So go ahead and continue with your examination, but if you could tighten up that question and the point you're trying to make here.
Yes, Your Honor. Ms. Cabrera, you never spoke to Stevie Rogers regarding Agatha's estate.
No, sir, I didn't.
And Stevie Rogers never offered you anything?
Well, no, but if I'm being honest, Stevie and I are friendly. I mean, if Drew doesn't win, I'll probably just ask Stevie for the book collection.
But to be clear, Stevie has not offered you anything, correct?
Well, no, because I haven't asked.
But Drew Mars did offer you those books.
Well, because I asked, yeah.
And you're testifying for Drew Mars today?
Well, sir, I'm only testifying for Drew Mars because Stevie didn't ask me. If Stevie asked me, I would have said yes to him too.
No further questions.
All right, thank you, counsel. Any redirect?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, you may proceed.
Ms. Cabrera, I'd like to talk to you about some things that you said on cross-examination.
Sure.
When Ms. Mars asked you to testify, did she offer you anything in exchange for your testimony?
In exchange? I mean, no, darling. I mean, Drew asked me to testify and I said I'd be happy to. And then Drew said, great, I appreciate it. On an unrelated note, Miss Lee was very fond of you. I mean,
Objection, Your Honor, to hearsay.
Do me a favor and specify exactly what statements you're objecting to.
Yes, Your Honor. The statement of Drew Mars that on an unrelated note, was there any, I know Agatha was very fond of you. Is there anything you'd like? That is a out-of-court statement being offered to prove the matter asserted. Now, while the plaintiff under Rule 801 D2 can elicit Drew Mars' statements, for the defense to elicit those statements here today is hearsay, per the ruling of Midlands Television Studio versus COSAC in the relevant case packet.
Okay.
Your Honor,
Response from the defense?
Your Honor, Ms. Mars was asking a question. Questions have no inherent truth value, so therefore this isn't hearsay.
Your Honor, may I be heard?
What question was being asked? Can you go ahead and tease that out and tell me what the question was specifically? The
question specifically that Ms. Cabrera is testifying to is, on an unrelated note, would you like anything from Miss Lee's estate? She was very fond of you. That is the question.
Okay.
May I respond, Your Honor?
Yes, you may.
While there is a statement contained in that, and we do contend that there is no true value within the statement began with, on an unrelated note. That has a truth matter, and defense is attempting to elicit here today. They are trying to show that it was truly an unrelated note that Drew Mars was bringing up testimony in relation to this compensation. And to bring that up is an out-of-court statement that they are offering for the truth of the matter asserted. I ask that if this question be brought in, that section be redacted.
Your Honor, if I may respond?
Yes, last response.
This witness already testified to that specific statement on an unrelated note during direct examination when counsel asked, so it's no longer an out-of-court statement. She's already testified that was unrelated.
Okay. Okay, last point. Is that your recollection of the prior testimony, Mr. Hayward?
Your Honor, I don't recall the witness ever mentioning the statement of on an unrelated note, as that would have also been inadmissible hearsay. I cannot say whether it was simply a lack of hearing on my part or if it was truly not stated, but I cannot attest to that recollection.
Sure. I don't believe that it's always categorically true that a question doesn't have any inherent truth value to it. I'm gonna sustain the objection, and that statement will be stricken.
Yes, Your Honor.
Ms. Cabrera, did you agree to testify before Ms. Mars offered you the books?
No, darling, no. It was before that I said I would testify, and then after that, sometime later in the conversation, Miss Lee got brought up and her belongings.
Are you testifying for the possession of the unpublished works today?
No, I mean, as I said, I'm just here to tell the truth. I have nothing bad to say really about either one of them. And if things don't go Drew's way, I'll probably just ask Stevie, and Stevie will probably give me the books.
Ms. Cabrera, why are you testifying today?
I'm just here because I loved Miss Agatha dearly. If something bad happened to her, I think that she deserves justice.
No further questions, Your Honor.
All right, thank you, counsel. Any recross?
No recross, Your Honor.
Okay, Ms. Cabrera, thank you for your
Thank you,
time.
Your Honor.
You're excused. All right, we will now hear closing arguments from each party. Everyone should please switch back to speaker view.
Your Honor, at this time I'd also like to make the court aware of the all lost time and that we are approximately 9 minutes away from it.
Okay. Okay. All right. Being told to just keep going here. So plaintiff, you may proceed with your, well, they're saying it's up to you to finish timely. So do you guys have any
Since we're at 8 minutes,
thoughts on how you're gonna?
In the past,
that?
I know that they've done splitting the closing time between the two, but
we can do that. We can do 4 minutes apiece and get it in if that works with the defense.
That works for me if it works for you.
Okay. Plaintiff's counsel, you may proceed when ready.
Yes, Your Honor. Members of the jury, the defendant is the only person who has the knowledge, the time, and the reason. And that's why I'm here today asking you to make sure that the villain does not win. Now, as the plaintiff in today's case, we bore the burden of proof, which means we had to show to you by a preponderance of the evidence that it was the defendant who knowingly or purposefully caused the death of Agatha Lee. And we showed that to you. And in order to do that, I want to back up and answer some really important questions about what happened on August 14th. And the first question is why? Well, members of the jury, the defendant was the only person who was on a time crunch. She had just overheard a conversation where Agatha Lee was going to change her will to Stevie Rogers. And aside from the fact that she just overheard whispers through a closed door, she wants you to believe that Agatha Lee had told Mr. Rogers, the plaintiff, no. Which leads me to ask why then that immediately after that conversation, Agatha Lee called her personal attorney, the one who deals with Agatha's will. And so what did the defendant do? As soon as she dropped off Agatha Lee at lunch, well, she took a trip to the drugstore. She bought chloroandramine and conveniently did not keep her receipt. The second question is, how did she know? Well, members of the jury, the defendant was aware of a heart attack that Agatha Lee had a few years back, one where she took half the dose in this case, and that sent her to a hospital. She knew that those pills could be purchased without a prescription and without showing any form of identification. And that's because the defendant knew that if she gave her double that dose, well, the cost would be fatal. But when did she do it? Well, members of the jury, later that night, the defendant was seen outside of Agatha Lee's room. She was walking towards it, her hands face up, and her fingers clasped. Members of the jury, that was a few hours after the defendant claimed that she was going to sleep that night. And it was at that point, after she swapped the pills that she took on a daily basis for chloroandramine, that she went back into her room. She took the bag that those pills were in and threw it into her closet, and that's where investigators found fingerprints on the bag. And it was because the defendant was the only one on a time crunch, the only one who knew the specifics of her allergies, and the only one who was alone in Agatha Lee's room, that we as the plaintiff ask you to hold the defendant liable. Thank you.
All right, thank you, counsel. Closing argument from the defense. Proceed when you're ready.
My apologies, Your Honor. Someone's blocked my video. It won't let me.
Block your video.
If the bailiff could maybe start my video. I'm so sorry. I know we're running out of time.
What do you mean by start? Ask to start video?
Okay,
There you go.
There you go. Okay, great. You may proceed when you're ready.
Members of the jury, the plaintiff told you lie after lie after lie today. You heard the plaintiff say they were close with the victim. A lie. You heard the plaintiff say they weren't in it for the money. A lie. You even heard the plaintiff allege that Drew Mars caused the death of Agatha Lee. A lie. Everything was conveniently lined up for Miss Mars to take the blame because Miss Mars was framed by the plaintiff for the fortune. In this case, if we look just a little closer, you can see the plaintiff had a motive to cause the death of the victim, had the means to kill the victim, and had the perfect opportunity to execute a plan. Today, the plaintiff had a burden. They had to show you that it was more likely than not Miss Mars knowingly caused the death of Agatha Lee. Knowingly meaning that Miss Mars could be practically certain her actions would cause the death of Miss Lee. Plaintiff counsel wasn't able to show any of that to you. How could Miss Mars be practically certain her actions would kill the victim when it was the plaintiff who gave the victim the pills that killed her? Because of this, you can't find Miss Mars responsible for the death of Agatha Lee. And to see how Miss Mars was framed, we should start at the beginning and examine the victim's relationship with the plaintiff. You heard the victim and the plaintiff were once close. However, their relationship disintegrated as the victim's letters and phone calls went unanswered year after year after year. The plaintiff was too busy burning through his trust fund to call his grandmother back, When he showed up at her doorstep, he had nothing to lose, but everything to gain. In fact, he had over $20 million to gain. The plaintiff spends the summer buttering up his grandmother, and on August 14th, when he asks for his inheritance back, she says no. It was time for her spoiled grandchild to learn to stand on his own 2 feet. You heard the plaintiff say his grandmother was going to put him back in the will. A lie. Miss Mars and Miss Cabrera both confirmed the opposite. The victim had never had an intention of giving the plaintiff a single penny. That night on August 14th, someone switches the victim's arthritis pills with chlorandramine pills. The pills look identical. The victim has a fatal allergy to chlorandramine. You heard the plaintiff knew about that fatal allergy, where the pills were kept, had access to buy chlorandramine, and had access to both the rooms of Drew Mars and the victim. Miss Bond got on the stand and confirmed all these facts for you today, in addition to the plaintiff himself testifying to it. Fast forward to August 14th, the victim is found dead of chlorandramine poisoning. And immediately, the plaintiff begins framing Drew Mars for the death, so the plaintiff can get the fortune. You heard today, members of the jury, the plaintiff knew before trial about the Slayer statute. The plaintiff had filed this very civil case before a toxicology screen had been done. And because of all these facts, you can't find Miss Mars liable for the death of Miss Agatha Lee. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, counsel. Thank you both for doing some great work under that time pressure. So we're going to go ahead and complete our ballots. And
I'm going to move actually the competitors over into their breakout rooms.
Okay.
Opening those rooms and sending them out now. The judges can go ahead and complete their ballots, and when you're done, click submit at the bottom. Don't forget to rank attorneys and witnesses. And I'm going to stop the live stream as well. And then once all the ballots have been submitted, we'll come back and do some very brief comments.